I come from a technology background, right? Like for 25 years, I was in, software businesses, zero to exit. And so my natural first set of clients when we started doing this consulting were those businesses. I had, friends who had become leaders in those businesses. So like, that's where my first business came from. And so as I started doing consulting combined with no code, it was very clear to me that this made all the sense in the world for a technology business. And then I started just through social connections, built a friendship with the CEO of a winery in Texas. So it's a good friend.
That's a good friend to
yeah,
have.
Really
right
good wine, actually. Anyway, so just as friends, we were hanging out over a couple of year period, having dinner once a quarter, more or less. And I was just asking him questions about how his winery operations, winery growth was going. And I don't know if they still are, but at the time they were the fastest growing winery in the state of Texas, in terms of like volume of wine, staff growth, wine brands growth. And he kept trying to tell a really optimistic story because there's some awesomeness in all that growth, but I could just hear behind those stories that how painful it was operationally for him to try to run that business. Because even though they're manufacturing wine, they're all of it has to be done through, alignment inside of a computer space. Ultimately, like, who's working on this wine and what's the marketing of it and how are we going to get this label printed and all of the operational dependencies to run that business. It became very clear to me that he was suffering from the same problems as the tech companies were suffering from. And so we just decided to kind of do an experiment to see if this thing that this deep alignment consulting combined with Notion custom workspace would help him. And we built so he at the end of this engagement, he came to me and said, okay, so what you've done for us is you built us what I call WineryOS, winery operating system. And by the way, this is essentially the inspiration for why we call what we do Scratch OS. Our consulting practice is called Scratch Advisors. And so when we build you a custom Notion workspace, we call it Scratch OS. But this CEO saying that we built him WineryOS was kind of the inspiration for it. Okay, so look, we built out a full consumer packaged good CPG manufacturing workflow. That's like the act of making wine. It requires scheduling. There's 100 to 150 meta properties that describe that wine, the percent of the alcohol, the vineyard, the percentage of grapes, all that stuff. Sure, it happens physically in the real world, but it has to be captured digitally because the rest of the company needs to consume it. Marketing needs to consume it. Legal needs to consume it. And so they were, oh my gosh, they were managing all this through a spreadsheet. And for those who are sort of operation minded, you're going to understand how painful this would have been. The spreadsheet was tabs, and every tab was a different phase of the workflow of the manufacturing process. But so they would have to cut and paste a winery record, a wine bottle record from one tab to the next, but the columns didn't match up. So every time they copy and pasted a wine across the spreadsheet, they were losing data. And so the way they would accommodate that is to go in and put comments around the broken cell and say, well, what should really be here is this. So you had to read all the comments on every record to know what.
This is not a small. This is what, like a $20 to $30 million
that's exactly right.
company.
So we disentangled all of that, rebuilt it from the ground up, and my big concern was going to be, will the winemakers adopt this? Because the winemakers chose to make wine for a reason. They like working with.
And these are the guys out in the field with dirt in their boots
the
and
last
their hands,
thing they
right?
want to do is interact with the computer. But they were guaranteeing more computer interaction by not having this process built, because every stakeholder downstream had to email them, had to Teams chat them, had to blow up their cell phone to say, we've got to get this wine bottle on the stores of the shelves of HEB. I need to know this critical information. And by the time they were getting blown up in that sort of downstream phase of the manufacturing process, they've already moved on in their heads to the next, vintage of wine they're building. So they don't want to stop and think about something they built 5 months ago. Yeah, that's
They're
right.
artistes, right? Yeah.
I'm an artiste. I cannot work in these conditions. And so what we were able to demonstrate together, and I'm thinking specifically now of like the head winemaker, the head of wine production, he and I partnered together, is that we were able to tell them, if you will simply update your wine manufacturing cycle as it's happening, nobody will ever bother you again. Because the marketing team, the label team, the finance team, they all had access to that data whenever they needed it because the winemaker did it one time. Oh, so here's
Teach
another
them how to
theme.
fish.
Here's another theme that we're going to hit on is the ROI of a keystroke. Like, yeah. When I wake up in the morning and my feet hit the ground and I'm doing, consulting combined with no code, I mean, a way to measure the efficacy of my day is, have I helped a client get higher ROI on one single keystroke? Right? Like the winemaker entering those details, 10 stakeholders would have otherwise interrupted them for that. So the cost, like that's negative ROI, versus
And you're not even talking about the frustration part
the economic
of it. You're
part.
just talking about financial, right? Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, and again, this is one of the reasons why Notion has proven itself to me as such a reliable tool, is because I truly did not know if I was going to be able to solve these problems for this winery. Like the CEO and I both kind of took an experiment together and like, let's just see. And like we've built a fully functional organizational wide winery operating system, that if we chose to verticalize that and go after wineries, like we could sell that. Now I want to be very clear.
Yeah.
It's not SaaS software, and the value comes from the uniqueness of the next winery and the next winery.
Yeah.